all here. My name is Mona Khalil, and I am with the Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs Office here with EERE. It's my pleasure to present to you today the results of a collaboration between WEP and energy management experts at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And I'll introduce our speaker in a minute. But before I do that, just wanted to give you a brief introduction about why we are discussing this topic today. As you know, DOE develops a number of data tools for the analysis of energy performance. And as we've seen, the number of local governments and states and other private sector organizations collect more and more building benchmarking data, we have also seen that the need around this topic area has grown. And so much of what we do here in technical assistance is in response to the different needs that we hear from you. And so as part of a way of moving forward, I'd like to invite you all to give us as much feedback as you can as the type of work that is important to you, and we hope to address those needs. So as you know, that the data cleansing piece is really just one slice of a larger effort to benchmark energy data and use the data to make smarter decisions on how to use energy. But it is a critical step prior to analysis and interpretation of data. The objective of this training module is to really we will get in the weeds here with you, and hopefully this is at the level that you would like to hear from us, to help energy analysts, planners, community officials, and other folks conduct energy performance benchmarking analysis. As part of this technical assistance, we're also creating similar training modules. They'll cover topics related to this, and so eventually we hope to offer an array of training modules in the benchmarking data space. So this first module focuses on cleansing data that's related to benchmarking. It's an important step forward to realizing the full benefits of benchmarking, and this specific module addresses various data cleansing issues and possible mitigation strategies. So today's speaker is Shankar Yarni. He's a program manager in Building Technologies and Urban Systems Division at LBNL, and he supports DOE's Federal Energy Management Program as well as WEP. And prior to LBNL, Shankar has worked as a Senior Performance Assurance Specialist at Johnson Controls, where he was involved with auditing, project development, and implementation of energy projects in commercial buildings. He also led and participated in several energy audits for industrial and commercial sectors as part of DOE's Industrial Assessment Center and identified energy and productivity savings. He has a PhD in industrial engineering and management and a master's degree and bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. And if we can move to the next slide, I'd like to give just a bit of background for folks who may not know us very well about the State and Local Technical Assistance Program. The State and Local Technical Assistance Program is part of the Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs Office, and our mission is to accelerate the deployment of energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies over a wide range of government, community, and business stakeholders in partnership with state and local governments. Our strategic objective is to deploy clean energy technologies that we have today, and we interact with you, with our partners, in a variety of ways. So as you may know, WIP provides more than $200 million per year in financial assistance in the form of formula and competitive awards to weatherize low-income homes and assist states in deploying energy efficiency and renewable energy projects and programs. But we also offer technical assistance by creating resources to assist the public sector with planning, financing, evaluating, and deploying energy efficiency and renewable energy programs and projects. And this is kind of represented with the top 5 icons that we have listed on top of this triangle. Our technical assistance also comes in the form of peer exchange opportunities and trainings. So just as today we offer webinars, we also hold conferences, as well as a number of voluntary partnership programs. And here I wanted to highlight the Better Buildings Challenge, which we now engage with more than 8 states, 40 local governments, and a dozen school districts that have partnered with us on working on reducing their energy use by 20% by the year 2020. And we also have launched 2 Better Buildings Challenge accelerators, which are partnership programs focused on breaking down very specific barriers to energy efficiency, including the performance contracting and deployment of high-performance outdoor lighting. And then finally, we offer a limited amount of direct technical assistance. Okay, so having said that, I think we're ready to launch the actual part of the program. Just wanted to give you on the previous slide how you can get more information, but this will be in the slides that will be attached on our website. So you can always find that, find those there. Okay, Shankar, take it away.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Mona. Again, my name is Shankar Ernie with Berkeley Labs. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Let's start with the kind of a course outline. We're going to start with the course objectives or the module or webinar objectives. Talk a little bit about the building benchmarking, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, what it is and what that entails. To discuss about this bad data, what it is, and types of bad data that one can expect to see in their data sets, and also some of the common sources or issues related to this bad data. So once we have this bad data, so how do we cleanse it, and why do we do it, and how do we do it? We are going to get into some of those details. And also we have outlined a process, data cleansing process that one might adopt to help with their data set. And finally, we're going to look at a real data set that we've analyzed or cleansed to provide some concrete examples as to what one might see when they look at their data. Next slide. Okay, the course objectives or the module objectives. This module is intended for personnel from cities or communities or states that have implemented or considering implementing an internal or community-wide benchmarking program or policy. And ideally, this is for folks that have a data set that they want to analyze, that are getting ready to analyze. So by the end of this module, you will be able to identify some common problems associated with the building energy data, and identify how accurate your data set is, and this will also help you to somewhat clean your data before embarking on a more detailed analysis exercise. So, introduction to benchmarking, just to make sure everybody on the same page. Benchmarking, stated simply, is the process of comparing buildings' energy performance to a standard reference point. So this reference point can be an internal one, where you're comparing your building's current performance with the last year's performance for the same time period, or it can be a benchmark or a reference point where you're trying to compare the building's performance with other similar buildings, either in your portfolio or with other set of buildings outside your portfolio. Sometimes this benchmark the reference point can be some kind of an established norm, like an ASHA 90.1. Benchmarking, this kind of comparison is very important, as this will help the organizations create and design and create an effective energy management strategies, and thereby it will help to focus your attention on buildings that are underperforming, and also subsequently conduct some kind of a root cause analysis as to why some buildings are consuming higher than some of the other ones. This building performance will not only help to identify and implement energy conservation measures, but it can also be used for measurement and verification so that you know how effective these measures are that you've implemented, so that they can be included, they can be implemented in a broader building stock. Some of the benefits of benchmarking is a proactive process approach to energy management that focuses on continuous improvement. It helps organizations manage their energy consumption in a more proactive manner than react to it. Benchmarking helps with, as we talked about, it helps with identifying their pre and post energy consumption, and also it helps you to assess the effectiveness of your current operations and practices, and it can also help you in setting some goals, because you have a firm knowledge on your building performance and portfolio's performance. You'll be able to set reasonable goals and targets and related timelines so that you can fulfill those goals in a timely manner. It also helps to communicate, because this benchmarking results identifies a sets of common benchmark, sets of common terminology, so that this will, by benchmarking, this will help you to communicate the results in a meaningful manner that other people can easily understand. Again, the important thing to keep in mind is all these benefits of benchmarking hinge on data. So bad data will not only characterize the building operation wrongly, but also may result in dedicating resources to wrong buildings and systems that might aggravate the problems. So the next slide talks about the building benchmarking process. This is a 7-step process. The first step is for the sake of comprehension, we kind of divided these 7 steps into three phases. The first step in this process is one develops a benchmarking plan. This is basically a plan and a systematic approach that outlines the purpose of the benchmarking program and the intended audience for the results, program results. This plan should also include the various roles and responsibilities of the team members, and how the data will be collected, and how the plan, the benchmarking plan, will be implemented. The next step in this process is benchmarking tools, identifying the benchmarking tools. As a large number of benchmarking tools are available that vary on their capabilities and costs. These can be simple spreadsheets to some web-based tools. The benchmarking process, the selection of a benchmarking tool is driven by the goals of the benchmarking program that has been outlined in the benchmarking plan. So when evaluating the various systems, it would be folks need to ensure that the required outputs that are needed for the benchmarking can be generated by the tool that's selected, and also the required data that's needed to conduct this benchmarking is easy to collect. As you all know, Energy Star Portfolio Manager is a commonly used and widely understood benchmarking tool. And the next step in this process is outreach, where you're trying to reach out to the broader community and engage the users, the community, and communicate your results in a manner that are easy to understand. So by early communication, this will help the early buy-in and participation from the leadership. This will ensure that the program receives the necessary resources so that the others that are involved in the team will see that this program is important and a worthwhile exercise to embark on. The data collection, this is where you'll start collecting the data. This identifies the This is where you're identifying the data that's needed to measure and communicate the results. This is the first step in the data collection process. It's important to understand the data necessary for benchmarking. This could include information related to the facilities or buildings and their constituent spaces. This might ask for more detailed asset level information about number of computers in an office building, or it might ask for number of beds in a hospital and things like that. The data collection also includes information related to the operational characteristics and the energy consumption. So we plan to dedicate a webinar exclusively for this topic, and in the coming few months. So please stay tuned for that. And in that webinar, we're going to provide more details on this specific step of the process. The next step in the process is the quality assurance and quality control, where you're ensuring that the data that you have or collected is clean before getting into a more detailed analysis. This module specifically focuses on this step, the step 5, where we are trying to see how clean the data is and what are the issues related to related to the bad data. And the next sequence is where one has a clean data set, and they're trying to analyze and interpret the results to understand the buildings that are underperforming, and thereby take actions that address these low-performing buildings. And the last step in this process is communicating the results. It's very important to communicate the results in a manner that's appropriate to the audience. The information needed by the facility managers versus the financial decision makers may take different forms. So it's important to understand the common language and communicate these metrics in a manner that are tailored to the target audience. Next slide, please. So this, as we talked about, Energy Star Portfolio Manager is a widely accepted benchmarking tool that's out there. So in this slide, you see on the left-hand side, you see some of the information or data that's being collected, that's being asked by the portfolio manager to conduct the benchmarking analysis. On the right side is where you see some of the metrics or variables that portfolio manager is going to report on. It's going to ask for property-related information, where one needs to identify the primary function of the building, location, and the age of the building. It's also going to ask for more detailed information related to the property type, where it asks for the gross floor area, number of computers in an office building, and operating hours. It also documents the energy consumption data, where it's basically the sum of all the energy that's consumed on a site. Energy Star Portfolio Manager not only reports the absolute performance of the building, but also it compares your building's performance with other targets that are out there. So it reports on site and source EUI. It also compares your building performance, as I said, with other buildings by giving an Energy Star score. Next slide, please. So let's look at what bad data is, what it is, and where does it come from, and how do we identify bad data. So benchmarking data may be erroneous, missing, miscorrelated, or estimated. So some of these errors might be quite obvious by just taking a cursory look at the data set. Some of these errors might be hard to locate and might involve a little bit of analysis to identify the bad data. So bad data can arise arise due to a number of issues and sources. Most importantly, this can be due to a human entry or some kind of a misinterpretations that the person entering the data has made to enter the data. And sometimes data errors can occur when the data is being transferred between different systems. And also sometimes the user who's entering the data may not have the complete information that might result in missing data. Other thing is lack of a standard data dictionary will result in errors that are somewhat hard to find. So how do we identify bad data? Some issues may be easy to identify, as I said, missing values, or if the energy consumption is off by a factor of a million, these may be somewhat easy to identify. But others might be quite tricky, and it's hard to distinguish whether if it's really an error or some kind of a special case where the building is consuming unusually high amount of energy or unusually low amount of energy. We've also seen cases where errors might result by estimations where the user doesn't have the required data, but he or she might be resorting to some kind of an estimations to impute some of these missing values. Let's look at let's look at these bad data types in more detail. Here are some of the possible examples, possible types of bad data that one might encounter in the data set. The unit conversion errors. I'm sure you might have seen this, where the energy consumption is being reported in a unit that's not consistent with what is being asked for. For example, this happens quite often in the case of natural gas. Natural gas gets reported in terms when it's actually being asked to report in million cubic feet or MMBTU. Sometimes the total square footage gets reported in its absolute values instead of being reported in thousands of SFT. That's kind of what most people ask for. So these kinds of these inconsistencies in units can sometimes result in errors. Another case of bad data is where the building end use type is misidentified. And this might cause some problems when you're trying to analyze the data. For example, a warehouse might be classified as a non-refrigerator when it's in essence a refrigerator warehouse. The miscorrelated data. This is the data where a variable in your data set, you're expecting that variable to correlate with something else in your data set. And you don't see that correlation. For example, the natural gas consumption should track the heating degree days, but due to for some reason it's not correlating with the natural gas consumption is not correlating with the heating degrees. So in that should raise some kind of a flag to prompt you to ask for more questions as to why that's happening. We have also seen cases where energy consumption might be reported year-to-date. Energy consumption is being reported when asked for the actual monthly energy consumption. So this issue can be easily identified by doing some kind of a correlation with your heating degree days or cooling degree days with actual energy consumption to see if to see if there are any issues. And also, we've seen instances where the user fails to report all the energy that's consumed for a building. He or she might be missing the data from one of the meters. So that might also result in unusually low energy consumption for the building. Another type of bad data is where you don't see any values. So it's a missing data or zero values. This can happen for any of the fields. It can be a missing building type or a missing gross flow rate or a missing energy. We've seen instances. We've also seen instances where some kind of special characters in the data might also cause issues when you're trying to analyze the data. For example, in this case, a comma between the zeros can cause problems and can prompt the system to be treated as a character instead of a number. And also the presence of units like KSFT can also treat this number to be a character string and thereby causing problems when analyzing the data. There's also another, sorry. There's also another possible case of bad data where the user, again, we talked about this, where the user has entered some estimated values because he or she does not have the necessary data to complete the process, so that might result in some problems. Mona, do you want to do the poll question?
Yes, we prepared a few polls to kind of gauge where you are in the process and help us better direct this training session. And so all of you, we invite you to answer the following question. Where are you in the benchmarking process right now?
It looks like it's evenly spread among all the four set of options. It's interesting to note that there are about 30% of the people that are either getting ready to cleanse the data or they're already on their way to or already doing their analysis.
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions for you. So keep tuned and thank you for that feedback.
So let's get into the data cleansing aspect of this presentation. Now we've kind of seen what bad data is. Let's look at what data cleansing is. Data cleansing is a process of carefully and systematically reviewing the data to remove or correct any suspected erroneous data before taking on a more detailed analysis. This process involves screening for common errors or missing data. These errors can be either at an individual record level, or it might be at the whole portfolio level. So this data cleansing will help you to identify some of those errors and help you to get a clean data set before taking on a more detailed analysis. Data accuracy needs to be ensured before, as I said, data accuracy needs to be ensured before a detailed analysis is performed. It's important to keep in mind that all data are unclean unless otherwise proven. So everybody, no matter how small data set they have, it's important to spend a little bit of a time to understand, to see how clean the data set is. By identifying some of these issues, this will also help to set up some preventive measures so that some of these errors can be identified or fixed at the source, rather than trying to spend some time trying to clean the data after the fact. So let's now we've looked at what bad data cleansing is. Now let's look at why one would want to do it. We kind of highlighted some of the key things as to what the benefits of data cleansing are. Again, as I said, it's very important to clean the data before to ensure that the accurate results are obtained when performing the analysis at the building level. This will also help to avoid any skewed conclusions at the portfolio level. Bad data contaminates the data set and can lead to high variances and uncertainties in the data analysis results. Bad data can lead to lack of confidence in results and potentially undermine the credibility of the program or policy. So here are some of the common data issues that are identified by BPD, Building Performance Database. DOE's Building Performance Database is an online system that provides access to empirical data based on the energy performance based on the physical and operational characteristics of the building. BPD contains data on more than 750,000 buildings, both on the residential and commercial side. A little bit of a background as to how they get their data. Building owners submit raw building performance data to the BPD team, who in turn spends quite a bit of time cleaning their data and then uploading the data into the database. So data, as you can imagine, data in the BPD undergoes a very thorough mapping, cleansing, and merging process to remove any suspected or erroneous entries. So these, as part of their work cleaning several data sets, they've identified, BPD team has identified several data issues. Some of these might be quite obvious, but these are some of the things that they look for when trying to identify if the data is clean or not. For example, related to the floor areas, any entry with a 0 floor areas is not something that they're going to accept. And also they're looking for errors where the net floor area is greater than the gross floor area, and also any entries with no building type or where the building type is not specified is not something that is screened out. Also, the energy consumption, zero or negative energy consumption is data with zero or negative energy consumption is also left out. They also have some set of rules that they adopt to see if the energy consumption that's being reported is complete or partial. So that's something that they're going to look for when to decide whether that data needs to go into the database or not. They also look for unusually high or low site UI numbers. And also they have some tailored set of rules that they have to identify if a particular building type is consuming very high or low energy based on some other additional data sources. Next one. The data cleansing process, in order to help folks clean their data, we've identified a process based on several resources that we've reviewed, and also based on looking at what the building performance database team has done. The first step in the process is where you're trying to identify and fix incorrect data types. This is where these issues are related to this step, or when the building that's described does not is different than what you normally expect to see in your data dictionary. And there might be also cases where the data type that you have in your data set might also not conform to what the data dictionary calls for. The second step in this process is where you're trying to identify and fix missing or erroneous values. These are values that are fairly obvious, and they can be easily be identified based on a cursory review of the data. And step 3 is where you're trying to find data inconsistencies, and this step is a little bit more involved, where you're trying to identify data that's outside the norms or outside the norms of the data that you would expect to see. This is where you need to establish some lower and upper limits and try to see which of the data that falls outside those ranges is considered to be a suspect. The next step in the process is where we're trying to ensure internal consistency, where in some cases where you might have several worths of benchmarking data, and you can rely on some of the old data to see if some of the missing data from the current year can be replaced with some of the old data. So again, you're trying to see if the data that you have in the past is consistent with what you currently have. Is this where you want to do another poll question? Sorry.
Yes, we have another question for all of you. This one is related to whether you've encountered in your analysis, whether you've encountered any errors, and what type of errors have you encountered in the process?
Yes, yes, as you would expect, yeah, most of the, a large percentage of the people have seen all different kinds of errors, so that's expected. Thanks for your responses. Okay. Yeah, in order to provide some concrete examples, we've analyzed a sample data set to show some of the issues related to that data, and also demonstrate some of the data cleansing techniques that one can use to clean this data. So the data set that we have or we've analyzed is a benchmarking data set that includes about 2,000 buildings. They're spread across, the performance data is spread across 4 years. The fields, it includes fields related to the facility ID, the activity type, building type, activity year, the floor area, and it also includes several energy utilization, energy use intensity numbers. These can be source, site, and also there are weather normalized site EUI and weather normalized site source EUI. This data set is from federal buildings, obtained from the compliance tracking system. We've also used some other data sets to highlight some of the issues that one might encounter while looking at the data set. So the data set that another data set that we looked at was the BPD's one of the data set that BPD has analyzed. Building Performance Database has analyzed, and we've also looked at some of the data that the City of Seattle has in their report. So as we talked about, the first step in the process is where you're trying to identify and fix incorrect data types. So this is where you're trying to ensure that the data that you have conforms to the standard data schema or data dictionary. One of the issues is that data providers use inconsistent nomenclature and data types when submitting data. For example, the building type for a record is different than what one would normally expect to see, and also we've seen cases where the data that's being reported does not quite conform to the data type that's expected. This is the case where you're expecting to see a number, but you're seeing some kind of a string, some kind of string, and that can cause some problems when analyzing the results. We also need to make sure that the data formats that are currently being reported in the data set conform to the standard format and are consistent across all the records in the data set. So the corrective action is just to adopt a standard dictionary. One of the standard dictionary that's out there is this DOE's Building Energy Data Exchange Spec. BEADS, as it's called. BEADS is a dictionary of terms and definitions commonly used for tools and activities that help stakeholders track building performance. Oftentimes, data providers do not include any reference tables, so it's up to the data cleanser to devise their own reference table based on the interviews so that the data gets reported in a consistent format. So here's an example as to what we've seen in our data set. in this case, there are the two plots. The plot on the left is from the unclean data set. As you can see, there are two. As you can see, the building types on the left plot, there are two different and distinct building types are shown as a result of a simple typo, even though they're technically the same building type. So as a result of fixing the building type on the right-hand side, now you see that both these records are merged into a building type that's what you would normally see in a data dictionary. So the corrective action, as I said, the building types need to be made sure that they're consistent with the building types from the data dictionary. A simple typo can cause some problems when analyzing the data. Here is another example of where the building types are classified differently by different people. Again, the plots show a portion of the building types and their count in the raw data set on their left and the cleansed data set on their right. The warehouse building type is characterized differently, and as you can see, it's characterized differently in different records. And as you see on the plot on the left, there are 5 different and distinct ways a warehouse is characterized. So all the 3 bars on the left, the blue bars on the left, are essentially implying that the building types that they have are non-refrigerator warehouses by making sure that the building type is consistent with the standard data dictionary. We were able to merge these 3 sets of data into one set of data that's classified under the non-refrigerated warehouse category. And also the 2 bars that you have on your left, the green bars that you have on the left is where the warehouses are essentially implying that it's the same type of building, but the presence of the singular and plural is causing the system to think that they're 2 separate buildings. But correcting that error, we were able to merge those 2 data sets and make it into one, thereby conforming to the data dictionary. So this is another example of where the expected data type, the data type that you're seeing in your data, it does not quite conform to the expected data type. In this case, some of the UI numbers shown in black font are being treated as a string because of the presence of comma. So after removing the comma and transforming the string to numbers, the data at the bottom now is conforming to the expected data types. And all the strings and numbers are converted into numerals and are ready for further processing. Tools like OpenRefine can help you to identify and correct some of these issues with less effort. This can be done in Excel, but it takes a little bit more time than what you would normally spend using some of these other tools like OpenRefine. This slide shows another example of data being reported in an inconsistent format. As you can see, the zip codes for the records are being reported in different formats that make it hard to analyze. In some cases, the zip code is being reported with 5 plus 4 digits. And in some cases, they're just using just the 5 digits. And in some cases, the trailing, the leading 0 is dropped, and it's that information is critical, and it needs to be, that information is critical, and it needs to be retained while conducting more detailed analysis. So the corrective action in this case is to make sure that the zip code format is consistent with the standard format that one would expect to see from a data dictionary. So the second step in the process is where you're trying to identify and fix erroneous values. This is where it's important to note that all data sets will contain data with errors, and these can be due to data entry or taking on default values instead of the actual values, or plain incomplete data. Some of the missing and erroneous values are fairly easy to identify based on a cursory review in Excel. A simple sorting, looking for zeros and things like that can help identify these issues. The corrective action and for these kinds of issues is to see if some of the missing values can be replaced by reviewing other sources of information. You might look at your tax assessor's data, or you might also look at your old data to see if some of these values some of this data can be obtained from them. So as I said, anything that's missing has to be flagged so that they can be completed through additional research, and excluding records with missing data. So it's important to identify some of the fields that are required, and it's anything that's missing for the required fields can be excluded, and keep records with errors and missing data in non-required fields. So the second step is based on our analysis of the data set, we were able to identify about 55 fields that have missing area. Out of this 55, we were able to obtain the missing area for one of these records by looking at our old data set. So when everything is said and done, we were able to we flagged about 54 records that need further investigation, and we removed them from subsequent analysis. There were about 60 fields that had missing energy data, and all these 60 were flagged and removed from subsequent analysis. We have found that there are about 11 records with erroneous building type. There are about 8 records with missing building type, and there were 3 that had a missing building ID. All these were flagged and removed from subsequent analysis. In total, we've identified about 67 inconsistencies, and all these 67 were flagged and excluded from subsequent analysis. So the next step in the process is where we're trying to identify other data inconsistencies. Here, this is where we're establishing some limits and trying to see if any of the data that you have falls outside this range. So this kind of process can be adopted to identify buildings that are outside a certain outside or below a certain gross square footage, or you can also identify buildings that are consuming that have very high or low site EUI, and you can also go one step below and see if some of the site EUI that you have for a specific building is within the accepted range. Next slide. So in order to identify these permissible values, we've relied on BPD's criteria. For but again, this is what we've used. But you can this criteria can be replaced or supplemented by other rules that one might have at their disposal based on their prior experience working with the benchmarking or other related data set. For example, in this case, BPD's example, they're looking for buildings that fall between the 100 and 7 million square feet. So anything outside that range is considered to be a suspect data. And also they're looking for site EUIs that are between 1 and 1,000 kBTU per square feet. Again, these are the limits that one should establish and look for buildings that fall outside these ranges to identify bad data. So now we have established the limits for some of these fields. The next step is we need to flag some of the outliers that fall outside this range. In this case, we have plotted gross square footage, and we're looking for buildings that are below 100 square feet, and also buildings that are greater than 7 million square feet. So we've shown a distribution plot here. As you can see, there are about 4 buildings that have a square footage of greater than the 7 million. And we've also done some analysis to see if there are any buildings that are less than 100 SFT. From the data set that we have, there are no buildings that fall under that category. So continuing our analysis to identify buildings that fall outside the limits, now we're looking at the site EUI numbers to see if any of the buildings that we have in our data set are consuming very high or consuming very low amount of energy. So we've seen from our data set we have about 253 entries that have a site EUI number of less than 1. And we have about 100 buildings that have a site EUI of greater than 1,000 kBTU per square feet. So further investigation needs to be conducted as to why these buildings reported to have such high or low site EUI, and this might be due to one of the buildings one or more buildings may have been combined into one and basically not accounting for it, or there might be an error in the energy consumption that's being reported. This is another plot based on the Seattle data. This is a box and whisker plot that shows the distribution of the data. This is, as I said, this is a plot that's obtained from the benchmarking report that the City of Seattle has put out. By looking at this, you can understand the distribution of your buildings by various building types. So anything that falls outside the those the gold or blue bands indicates that the building is consuming a significantly higher amount of energy. So these kinds of visualizations tools will help you to understand where your buildings stand compared to each other, and identify any buildings that are consuming very low or high amount of energy. Yeah, step 3 is again, we're continuing with step 3, where we're trying to identify any other types of data issues. This is a plot that was obtained from one of the data sets that building performance database team has analyzed. This data set consists of about 11,000 residential buildings. The histogram on the left indicates that there are about 8% of the buildings that are being reported have exactly the same site UI number, that is the 32 kBTU per square feet per year. This unusually high number of buildings with exact same site UI is somewhat suspicious. Upon their further analysis or investigation, they were able to confirm that the site UIs were estimated using some kind of a default, some kind of were estimated by the personnel based on a certain algorithm, and that's the reason you see those buildings reporting the exact same site UI. So based on that rule, based on that information, BPD eliminated those 8% of the records because these are not the actual values. These are in essence estimated values. To improve the quality of the data that's imported into the BPD, BPD now only accepts data with unique UI numbers. On the surface, this rule might seem excessively restrictive, but BPD's goal is to make sure that the quality of data that flows into the system is high, and they've basically are using this tool to screen future data sets. Step 4 is where you're trying to make sure that the data that you have is consistent with other data sets that you may have already analyzed. In this case, we're looking for significant variations in site UI compared from year to year. As you can see, as you can see, the site EUI numbers for building 1 has varied by 36%. The 2003 site EUI number has increased by 36% compared to 2011, and the building 2 site EUI number has considerably decreased, and it's decreased by about 85%, and building 3 site EUI has gone up by 68%. So according to the rules that are laid out in the City of Seattle's benchmarking report, a site EUI that a variation that's larger than 50% is considered to be a suspect. So in this case, building 2 and 3 are showing significant variation in their site EUI. It's important to understand why these buildings are seeing that significant variation. So as you know, site EUI is the ratio of the energy to the square footage. So it's important to understand where this variation is coming from. In order to do that, the next slide shows the graph on the left is the plot of the MMBTU for the same set of buildings. As you can see, the building 3, the building energy use is increased considerably, and that is the main reason why the site EUI has gone up. For building 2, the building energy use is somewhat stable, and the reason why the site EUI for building 2 has decreased is because of a significant increase in their reported gross square footage for 2013. The 2011, the gross square footage for 2011 was only 88. 2011 and 2012 was only 88 KSFT, but the KSFT for 2013 jumped by almost 4 times, and that's causing the big drop in the site EUI numbers that you've seen on the previous slide. So some of the recommendations based on the data analysis that we've seen, it's important to get a feel for the various building types and their characteristics and their usage patterns to spot errors. Some data manipulation techniques can help go a long way to spot outliers. This can include sorting the values, identifying the missing data, and also doing some kind of a distribution, drawing the distributions to see how many of the buildings that you have in your data set fall outside the norms. It also helps to conduct some simplified statistical analysis to characterize your portfolio and identify any other additional data issues. The use of metadata can also help. There is a component in the building energy data exchange specific in the data dictionary that specifically identifies the source of the data. So by looking at, by knowing where the data is coming from, this can be very valuable to identify which data to rely on in case of any discrepancies. Mona, do you want to You want to do a poll question?
Yeah, sure. Why not? So our final poll question relates to office hours that we will be offering on Thursday, May 7th and Tuesday, May 12th. We would like to gauge your interest in calling us up on the phone. We will have a go-to meeting set up where we can share a screen. But if you have specific questions that you would like to help us resolve with you, would love to hear from you, whether you would be interested in joining us on these office hour calls. Again, the date is Thursday, May 7th, and the dates and the times will be posted at the end of the webinar, but the first one is on Thursday, May 7th, and the second one is Tuesday, May 12th. Thank you all.
Okay, the results of the data cleansing process. We started. Our original data set has about 2,500 records that span multiple years. We found there are several missing data, and we've also identified some anomalies in the building types that then after fixing some of the issues related to building types, we were able to bring down the building types from 46 to 38 after fixing and some of the issues related to missing data. We were able to we flagged about 72 that needs further investigation. We've also identified some data inconsistencies where the site EUI and the square footage were outside the established established limits. We've also identified cases where we saw big variations in the site EUI compared to the previous year's data. There are about 10 of these buildings. So after finishing up this process, we were able to flag about 12% of the entries, and that brought down our data set from 3,500 buildings to about 3,100 records, 3,500 records to 3,100 records. Next slide, please. In summary, all data sets are dirty until proven otherwise. The BPD has far more stringent rules, and they throw away about 20% of their data that's provided by data contributors due to various data quality issues. Cleansing the data will strengthen the confidence in the final results and help devise the right corrective actions. Some of the issues related to the data quality can be mitigated by the use of standardized data dictionary. That will help to reduce some of the efforts related to the mapping exercise. Another important data quality issue is related to identifying missing or suspicious values. It's important to know that even though some of the individual data fields seem suspect, it may not be necessary to throw out the whole building record. Other fields may still be valid for conducting a subsequent analysis. In an example that we've shown earlier, we have seen where the case where similar the buildings have the records have exactly the same energy site UI numbers, even though the buildings are of a different types, and also are in different locations. So these, as we've seen, these are caused due to the estimations. In general, if there are many buildings with the same number being reported for any of the fields, that should raise some flags and needs further investigation. Continuing with our summary, another important technique to cleanse the data is to effective use of data ranges to identify data anomalies. This may require more experience or other supporting data sources to make judgments as to what those reasonable values are. You can rely on the limits that are established by BPD, or you might use some other data that you might have gathered based on your experience. But identifying these outliers is an important step in this data cleansing process. As we found, there are other ways that one can obtain this data. For example, you might look at your tax assessor data to see what the maximum or minimum gross square floor area that you have for any of your buildings, and that can help you to establish the limits. The ranges of EUI can be obtained from other sources like CBEX. As we talked about, data cleansing is one of the key steps along the journey to learn about your building portfolio and towards a more continuous path of improved building performance. Utilizing some of the basic techniques outlined here and spending some time to cleanse the data can go a long way to ensure that the final analysis results are accurate and can help design the right course of action. And also, some of these data cleansing techniques can be automated so that the data cleansing can be somewhat automating these data cleansing procedures can make this process less error prone, and it can make it more energy efficient, more efficient. In the last slide, this is where we have provided some data resources, sources for some of our work that we have shown here. And as Mona said, we are planning to hold the office hours on Thursday, the May 7th, at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and also we plan on holding another session on May 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you, Shankar. Again, let us know if you would like to join those office hours. We will be sending out follow-up links to sign up for the go-to meeting that we will be holding during that time. So watch in your emails for the link to sign up for those office hours. So Shankar, thank you very much. This has been a lot of work to kind of put this presentation together. So I hope that everyone found it useful. Hopefully you can apply it to some of the work that you're doing. I wanted to address some of the questions that have come in during the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. And let's go to the first question that came in. I'll just read it off. It says, do you have any guidance for methods for estimating data to fill missing values?
I don't have any specific guidance, but but the question remains whether one wants to estimate the values, because at the end of the day we want to look at the actual data and not the estimations. So by including some of these estimated values, that might skew the data and might give you results that that are somewhat misleading. But yeah, I would refer to the two documents that we have. The one on the BPD, we talked about BPD, but BPD does not do any estimations. It takes all the values and it assumes all the values. It does some analysis to see if some of these values are estimations, but it only wants to look at the actual values. But to answer your question, City of Seattle has a benchmarking report. They might have some resources that will help you to identify the ways as to how one can estimate these values.
Thank you, Shankar. And Allison did reply that by ignoring the missing values, you would also skew the data. The EUI, for example, would be lower than actual if we ignored missing data. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but when we say ignore it, then we're basically trying to see if there are other possible ways we can go and get the data. Again, we're trying to flag this data so that we can go back and ask more pointed questions to see if they can give us actual data. But yeah, when everything else fails, you might have to resort to some kind of an estimations to move on with your analysis.
Great. And the next question is, why wouldn't the EUI outlier range be set at something higher than 1, for example, 10 or 20?
Yeah, it can. An example that we have there is something that the BPD team has used. But if you know your building data and if you're intimately familiar with some of the buildings that you have, you might have only office buildings, and then you might say, okay, my office building site EUI can only vary between 10 and 100. You can establish those limits based on the data that you have. Again, we're not recommending that you use that one number. It's just an example that we've provided there.
Thank you. Another question is, what are your thoughts on data cleansing, so after collecting the data, versus data validation requirements, which are expected to happen before data submission? Specifically, do you have any recommendations for cities and states that have mandatory benchmarking policies in place and want to define reasonable expectations for the accuracy level that a submission must meet before it can be considered to be in compliance with reporting required? Doesn't have to be perfect, but is there a reasonable metric of completeness and accuracy that we could refer to?
I don't have an answer. Can you think of any resources? Based on my experience, I was actually looking for this, and I was not able to come across anything that can be used in this context.
Yeah, I think we're all still trying to figure that out, and so is the person asking the question. So we will be looking out for that, but absolutely, that's a very important issue. I think the education piece is important. It's not really the answer, but we talked in the beginning about the dictionaries and using standard nomenclature, and the data suppliers must be familiar with those. And so I think some of the data quality can be improved ahead of time if the data suppliers are familiar with the requirements. that's the best I can do, I guess.
There was a comment about showing that resources slide. Monica, can you go back and show them the resources slide?
Thank you. And one more question is a comment that Montgomery County has a verification aspect to their law, and that happy to connect with them too. So we can connect you following the webinar if you would like to hear more about that.
Okay.
Great. Are there any other questions? That's all that I'm showing on my screen. So I'd like to thank all of you for your attention. Please keep telling us the kind of technical assistance and resources that you need to do your jobs. We're always interested in hearing that. There's a short questionnaire that will follow this webinar. If you have a minute, please submit your answers. We're really looking for your feedback, so help us provide better and better webinars in the future. So please spend a minute on that. It shouldn't take more than that. Thank you all for your attention, and we will speak with you again on another webinar. Have a good day.